All right, take two. This is Scott Harris for 2018 TOK presentation. So for my real life situation, I chose the issue of Duke Energy dumping coal ash into the Cape Fear River. A little background on this: basically, Duke Energy has coal burning plants all along the Cape Fear River basin, and they needed a way to get rid of the waste, the coal ash that comes from burning coal. So basically, they found a cheap and easy solution. They made these ponds where they could dump the waste, and basically, it started polluting the Cape Fear River. So Duke Energy dumping coal ash into the Cape Fear River basin, which is destroying habitats and it has polluted drinking water as well. This will be based on the decision making of the Duke Energy corporation, I guess. My knowledge question is, to what extent do our personal values get pushed aside for monetary gain? So we'll be exploring basically what the Duke Energy company was thinking, and then looking at the area of knowing ethics and the ways of knowing reason and emotion through decision making with Duke as well as in general. So basically, the leadership of Duke Energy, who made that decision, used reason and emotion in their decision-making process, and their final decision was a testament of their ethics. So looking at this first area of knowing, we have ethics. So the first claim is a person's ethics can be clouded by monetary gain, and a study found that if there is a big enough monetary gain on the line, someone's ethics can be blurred and pushed aside, basically to the point where they will even break the rules. That's the first claim. The counterclaim to this would be that decision making is going to compromise ethics no matter what happens. So basically, no matter what decision you're making, you're going to be choosing one thing over another. There are consequences for both sides, and there would be some sort of ethical challenge that you would encounter. So the example for this would be Duke Energy could say, well, we would either have to damage the environment, or we are not able to produce a basic necessity that people need, which is power. So either way, they're breaking an ethical standard by not producing power for people, which they've promised to do, or they're either harming the environment. So either way, it's an ethical question mark. So the conclusion from this is that big decisions usually have consequences of ethical standards on either side, and keeping ethical standards is going to be very difficult to do. So basically, you can either look at it like you're picking the lesser of two evils, or you can try to keep to what you think is right. It's all about personal ethics. Next is reason. So reason is pretty much someone's ability to take facts and then use their logic to make the best possible decision. So the first claim for reason is that strong emotions can get in the way of someone's ability to reason when making a decision. Using the ability to reason and think rationally often gets blinded if there's a consequence on either side that spikes strong emotions. So we could look at you could think of it like the playground on basketball, and you're picking teams, and you might be emotionally connected to your best friend, but you want to pick the best player. This is where your ability to reason might be blinded. Reason would tell you to pick the better player, but emotion tells you pick your best friend even though he's not the best player. So it's an emotional conflict which can get in the way of your ability to reason. The counterclaim for this is that reason and emotion are two separate entities, and with self-control and discipline, they can be kept completely separate. So my conclusion from this was that while thinking rationally and using reason is often a better way to make a decision, emotions can interfere with this. Keeping emotion and reason separate is very difficult, but it can be done. The last one we have is emotion. The first claim on emotion is that Emotion can affect anyone's decision if there are severe enough connections on either side. So basically, if there are high stakes um, on either side, either decision, your emotions can play a strong role in what you pick. For example, if there's a businessman having to make a tough decision in his business, he might have to worry about emotional connections with employees or work like other workers and like business partners, that he might have to put those emotional relationships to the side in order to make the best decision for the business, which can be difficult, which we saw with reason. They're very connected. Emotion and reason are very connected because there's a fine line between not enough and too much emotion in a decision. The counterclaim here is that greed. Greed is human nature. There was a study that basically found that greed is heightened when there is a secondary reinforcer involved. A secondary reinforcer is anything that pleases a human. So money is a prime example of a secondary reinforcer. So if we look at the Duke Energy situation, the leaders of Duke Energy may know that they're polluting the environment, but there's money involved, and a lot of it because they're a large corporation. So the secondary reinforcer for Duke Energy is the money, and we see that in their situation, they went with the money. So the conclusion from here is that taking emotion out of big decision making is possible, but it's extremely difficult. It's very similar to reason, where it's human nature to be emotional. If it wasn't, life would probably be a lot easier. But basically, taking emotion out of these relationships can be very difficult because you may be strongly connected to someone. But if it really came down to it, it is possible to separate these two. So it could go either way. That's the conclusion on emotion, is that it can go either way. So finally, my conclusion is that the common theme between these areas of knowing and ways of knowing is that emotion and reason are very connected. And based on what happens with reason and emotion will affect ethics. So if you're looking at reason and emotion, we see that emotion can hinder the ability to use logic and reason, but reason is usually the better way to go. So if you're able to reason, you're usually able to stick to your ethical standards. But if you let your emotions get in the way too much, you may not be able to. So emotions can be very dangerous in decision making. So the way this relates to the Duke Energy situation is, I'll sort of put in the pieces to what's going on here. So the Duke Energy company was faced with an ethical decision. Are we going to pollute the environment and make money, or are we going to spend more money on waste management and not make as much of a profit? That was the ethical decision. Well, if they were to reason, then they would say, we can still make a large profit off of making power and burning coal for people. We just have to spend a little more money on waste management. But the emotional side, the greed, the human nature, basically blinded their decision making, and they were not able to, I guess you could say, think clearly. They were unable to ignore the secondary reinforcer, which was money, and eventually that ended up causing them to break their ethical standards.